I'm going to introduce Thomas Reynolds. Thomas has over 20 years of experience in nonprofit leadership, focused on addressing poverty, hunger, and other forms of global injustice all over the world. After working in Eastern Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa, he served as Vice President of Program Partnerships and Learning at CARE, responsible for anti-poverty programs in 95 countries. Since 2017, Thomas has been the CEO of Northwest Harvest, where he's focused on advancing equity-oriented policy outcomes, developing a network of human service providers, and distributing nutritious food throughout Washington state. So please join me in welcoming Thomas to the stage. Write your questions down because you may have time for some questions here at the end.
Okay, I think I waited long enough to turn on the microphone. Thank you very much for having me this morning. What a wonderful group. Mike, fantastic comments about food banking. Matt, thanks for sharing those statistics. I'm really happy to be here this morning. I really feel like this is a moment for me to steward this time. There's so much wisdom and knowledge in this room. I hope you're not looking to me to provide, the information that you've never heard before. Really, I have planned sort of a learning experience for myself, if I'm very honest. I'm going to be using a live survey tool, so I hope many of you brought phones and you're willing to take a journey with me. I'm going to ask you about 5 questions because I'm really curious about the answers. What I want to talk about is, there's a nice little lid there. I want to talk about hunger. And for us at Northwest Harvest, we say hunger isn't just the absence of food. From a technological standpoint, there's enough know-how, there's enough land, there's enough growing season that there is enough food on earth to feed everyone on earth. And yet we know that there's still tremendous food insecurity in this county, in this state, in this country, across the world. And so it's not just the absence of food. Hunger is the function of systems that fail people, politics of cruelty, the distribution of resources to people who have lots of resources and the inability for others to source resources at all. And so really, hunger isn't just the absence of food, it's the absence of justice. Now, I'll just tell you just a little bit about me. I am the CEO of Northwest Harvest. I grew up in Tacoma. I use he, him pronouns. I grew up in a household that was food insecure. I'm going to talk about the definition of food insecurity in just a moment. But food insecurity is not just about not having enough meals, and of course that is tracked. It's the number of meals that you have in a day, in a week, in a month, and when you skip meals or you don't have as much nutrients as what would be advised, that is low food security, but it's also this perception, this worry, this anxiety that you are not going to be able to source enough for yourself or enough for your household. And that's really what I saw in my mom. My mom was by the way, my mom, I think this is being recorded, my mom watches everything that I do, all of my television appearances, so she's going to watch this. So Mom, thank you. You are my hero. I love you. I admire you. What I noticed when growing up is when we didn't have enough money, my mom, you could see the stress on her face. And she would worry out loud about, is there going to be enough food for tomorrow's dinner or next week's food? She had this nervous habit of digging at her nails to the point that her hands would be bloody. And as much as hunger is about not having enough food and the impact of not having enough food. We know if you go to school and you're hungry, it's harder to learn. We know that if you're at work and you haven't eaten, it's harder enough to have the energy, especially if you do manual labor, to work at your optimum. But it's also the stress and the pain and the anxiety of not having enough. And that has an impact on our bodies and our minds as well. Northwest Harvest, our mission is growing food justice through collective action. We're often described as a food bank. We call ourselves a food justice organization because we think, as Mike already mentioned, we both need to address the real needs of people today to have enough food to get through their days, hopefully to thrive, but we also need to address and confront and disrupt the systems that are, annoyingly effective in staying in place that creates people who have enough and people who often struggle without having enough. And so we want to work on the justice piece, which is about a more equitable Washington state. I want to say thank you. I already mentioned this in advance, but I'm going to be using something called Mentimeter to gather information for you all. So this is a learning experience for me. So I'm saying thank you in advance for joining me on that. I'm hoping that you'll take that journey with me. This will be a really failed presentation if you all don't want to join me on this. So I'm really hoping you'll do that with me. I also want to thank Liz and Nika for just giving me the opportunity to be here with you today, and to all of you for the work that you do. I know the unbelievable challenges. I don't know your work individually, but I can just assume the unbelievable challenges that you all have faced. Maybe there's federal funding that didn't come or was canceled. There are more people who need what you do right now. There's tremendous uncertainty about what might happen next week, next month, or next year. And yet you are here and you're navigating that, and you're creating such incredible value for your communities across these 5 counties that you represent. So thank you to you all for what you do. Now, if you know how to use a QR code, grab your phone and do the QR code, scan that, or if you don't know how to do that, you could just use your camera, or you can go to menti.com and you can enter the code that you see there. I'm going to ask you a question in about 10 seconds. So grab that and get ready. The code, if you have difficulty seeing, you go to menti.com, menti.com, and the code is 71329886. Okay, we're going to use that. And by the way, this entire survey, because I am only an English speaker, the survey questions are all in English, but you can respond in any language that is preferred for you. So questions in English, but I anticipate the responses will be in a number of different languages. So first question is, and I hope this is coming on your phone. Is anyone seeing this question on your phone? Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up. Just in one word, describe how you're feeling right now. And we'll see a word cloud. We can begin to source from each other how today is starting for all of us. I see quite a few tireds. The larger the font means the more people have shared that. I see overwhelmed. I see exhausted. I see stressed. I also see inspired. I see grateful. I think it makes sense that we're coming into this room with all different feelings and thoughts and expectations. I share with my team, I've got this amazing team at Northwest Harvest. I share with my team, it's my reflection that Each of us in any meeting, there's 4 things going on in all of our brains, at least, all at the same time. The first one is we're trying to focus on what the topic is. The second is we're thinking about all that other work that we need to be doing that is distracting us from focusing on that topic. And then there's the most special and valuable things happening in our lives right now. And then there's the most difficult things happening in our lives right now. And in every meeting, in every place, I think we bring at least all 4 of those things to every topic. And so I think that's reflected here in our word cloud. I love the fact that curious, excited, and hopeful is trending towards the center. That's really cool. So we're going to do several more questions. Again, this is for me to learn from you and for you all to learn from each other. So food insecurity, and I already mentioned this essentially, but food insecurity is the economic and social condition of limited or uncertain access to adequate, nutritious food necessary for an active, healthy life. And I just want to sort of underline that uncertain, because to me, food insecurity is a complex variable. It both helps us track the amount of food available compared to the amount of food we need, but it also has that component of the uncertainty, the anxiousness, the I'm not sure if I know where food's going to be coming from. And so many of the people that we work with, that's the condition that they themselves and their households are facing right now. It's whether the food is on the table for lunch or for dinner or for breakfast, that's one thing. And then it's the uncertainty, the stress, the anxiety around, is it going to be there next week as well? Okay, I am just curious to get a sense from you all. The question is, in the community or communities I work in, food insecurity is increasing, decreasing, staying about the same, or I'm not sure. Just curious about your own experiences right now. Looks like it is overwhelmingly increasing right now. Some people are saying decreasing, some are saying staying about the same, and a number of us are not sure. I can tell you, and I'm going to give you some whys in a little bit here. But across the state of Washington, and I think it's true in the counties that you work in many, many communities, food insecurity is on the rise. That's not entirely true in every community we work in, and so I think to me it makes sense that we've got overwhelmingly increasing, but we also have pockets of decreasing and staying about the same as well. And I think about we define community in so many different ways. Community could be geographic, it could be a faith community, it could be a sexual orientation community. There's all these different ways that we identify what community means, and we're part of many different communities as well. And so we might be simultaneously a part of a community that food insecurity is increasing, and also part of a community that food insecurity is staying about the same. Just depends on which community we're associating ourselves with or thinking about that we serve. But here's a pretty significant visual. If I just do math numbers, and it's always dangerous to do math when you're standing in front of a crowd, it looks like somewhere between 8 and 10 and 9 and 10 of us are seeing food insecurity increasing in the communities that we work with. That makes sense. Since about 2021, we've seen food insecurity rise across Washington State, and that's true across the entire United States. And this number is accurate as of a couple months ago. I don't know the exact number today, but about 930,000 Washingtonians are food insecure. And Mike, you already mentioned that about 50% of the people that you see are children and elders. That tracks true across the state of Washington from what we understand. We also understand that veterans, LGBTQIA plus communities, disproportionately impacted by food insecurity. Black folk, indigenous folk, communities of color also disproportionately impacted by food insecurity. And we also recognize that often some of the best and strongest solutions and the most relevant and most impactful solutions to address food insecurity come from the same communities that experience disproportionately high rates of food insecurity. So the people who experience the garbage of injustice also come up with some of the most beautiful solutions as well. Clearly, I think we probably know this intuitively, but the Venn diagram of poverty and the Venn diagram of food insecurity overlap very, very closely. And also, by the way, something that's interesting is, and many of you probably know this, the unemployment rate is also a strongly correlated indicator to food insecurity rates. So when unemployment goes up, food insecurity tends to go up. When unemployment goes down, food insecurity tends to go down. However, over the last several years, that hasn't been true. So this is a time that's a little bit different from the long-term correlations or relationships. Okay, this is an open-ended question. What's your opinion? Why is it that nearly 1 million of our neighbors here are food insecure? Poverty, food's expensive, greed, affordability, injustice, low wages. Yeah, we see this. I mean, it's not really a mystery, is it? It's not something we scratch our heads about and say this is so complicated that it's impossible to find, the problem set. We intuitively know why people are food insecure. Capitalism, right at the center of the word cloud. I'll give it just a couple more minutes in case someone's writing a paragraph. Broken systems, I see. Billionaires, racism. My 50-year-old eyes now have trouble seeing the smaller ones, but I'm sure there's some other really good ones in there as well. I'm about to tell you all the things that you just listed. Here's some of the major themes of why there's food insecurity in Washington right now. Rising grocery prices impacts everyone. I didn't watch television last night, but I think if I might have heard that everything's perfect and we're in the best place we've ever been, and that maybe even grocery prices are going down. But we know that's not true. 78% of Washingtonians talk about price increases, and 82% of us worry about the future cost of food. So just a major, major piece. It's this inflation piece. And this is why we're starting to see a reduced correlation between unemployment rate and food insecurity, because food's getting more expensive for everybody. High housing costs and overall cost of living. Again, the collective wisdom of the group already identified this, and it was prominently featured in the word cloud. So we know that housing costs are increasing faster than wages. How often do we hear about 5, 6, 7 people living together just to try to make the cost per person push down into a range that we can afford the other things that are part of our lives? Also, rent, utilities, all of these different pieces. What if you've got a vehicle and the vehicle breaks down, and who has enough money for sort of emergency cash outlays? Very, very tiny percentage of households around Washington State have enough resources for bad surprises. The expiration of pandemic-era assistance programs. We were, from 2008 until 2021, food insecurity rates continually tracked down in Washington state. And we could see it, we could anticipate it. And when there was expanded eligibility for SNAP, for instance, when there were stimulus checks, when there was more SNAP benefits, when there were other programs that supported low-income folks and households, we saw the food insecurity rates go down. It went down in a very consistent and predictable way. And if we had done a regression analysis of the rate in which food insecurity was decreasing from 2018 to 2021, if we had continued with those things that were working, we would be at a very much lower food insecurity rate today instead of this skyrocketing up in food insecurity rate. And so to me that suggests we actually know what works. We know the things that work. So it's not like there'll always be hunger and throw up your hands. It doesn't have to be that way. We could collectively make choices. Government can make choices and reduce the food insecurity rates down to zero. So it's the expiration of those pandemic-era assistance programs that really caused some growth in food insecurity. And then just, we already talked about this, but we mentioned it in our word cloud, but, things like racism, things like the way that we are treating newly arrived immigrant communities in this country right now. It has a disproportionate impact on vulnerable populations. We already heard this morning that drive-through programs and home delivery programs are valued and working. We run a free grocery store in Yakima, and many of the people who access that free grocery store have asked us to make drive-through something that we do every day that we're open, because there's so much concern, so much fear, so much alarm around personal safety and family safety right now, just by getting out of a car and walking into a place that exists to serve the folks who are experiencing that fear. What sort of place are we living in right now that is the case when people feel afraid to go get food to bring home? So the disproportionate impact also contributes to food insecurity. Also, there's an increased reliance on food assistance programs, and the coverage is insufficient. In this, we just had this wonderful experience where we saw food insecurity rates going down because we increased eligibility. We reduced sort of the sometimes undignifying hurdles that we made people jump over, or the paperwork burdens that we put on people to get access to resources. Now we're going the other direction. We're making things harder. We're spending, collectively in this country, we're going back to doing more shaming of people. We're looking to make more criteria for who should be eligible for benefits. And so that's a big impact. Mike and Matt, you all mentioned the amount of food bank visits. We are way up from where we were just 7 years ago. We're up to 3.4 million visits in 2024. I bet it's even higher in 2025. Finally, just economic pressures. I saw this on our word cloud as well. As things get more expensive, wages are not tracking with that growth in inflation. So households are falling further and further behind. Education costs, housing costs, utilities costs, food costs, all these different costs are we are not seeing incomes keep up with the cost of being alive here in Washington state. So it is for all of those reasons that there is high rates of food insecurity in Washington State right now, and I'm sure you all see it in your 5 counties. Just switching gears a little bit, the food insecurity, at Northwest Harvest, we don't subscribe to this idea that there are the haves in society and there are the have-nots in society, and we can make things work if the haves give to the have-nots. I just think that's a really useless way of thinking about things. I think, Matt, when you introduced me, you mentioned that I used to work for an international organization, and I lived and worked in 70 different countries, and one of the programs that the organization I worked for put on was a high school exchange program in and around the Lima area in Peru. And it was a pairing of schools. One was a private school in a prestigious neighborhood in Lima, and one was a public school in one of the hillside neighborhoods of Lima. And the goal was to build empathy between different student population groups. And I think what we can recognize is we all have areas of abundance, and we all have areas of deficit. And some of the most financially resourced people in the world seem to have this extraordinary deficit when it comes to resilience, or even creative problem solving that doesn't use financial resources. And so, as we think about coming together as a community, as a people, I suggest we all look for our own areas of deficit and look for people who have those areas in abundance, and we see it much more as an exchange of resources rather than wealthy people giving to lower income people. I think in that exchange, actually, wealthy people gain a lot from maybe feeling less guilty or being able to tell stories that make them feel good, or there's lots of different aspects about this exchange of resources when we talk about philanthropy. Inclusion is one of the central tenets of what we're interested in Northwest Harvest. And as I by the way, I went back and I looked at your past conferences and the videos, and I listened to your speakers, and I was blown away by the wisdom that was shared. And I noticed that inclusion and equity are a really big part of what you all do. I think that's admirable. And to me, inclusion is so incredibly important. The involvement and empowerment where inherent worth and dignity of all people are recognized. It's being able to use those fonts of wisdom and those sources of knowledge and those areas of abundance without making assumptions about who brings the most to the table. I think everyone has something powerful and important to gather. So I'm just curious about, in the communities that you're working in right now, what's happening with inclusion? Is inclusion increasing? Is it decreasing? Is it staying about the same, or you don't know? And I'll give a moment to see what our bar graph does for us. Certainly, I think there's a national message right now about it's the antithesis of inclusion. It's a national message around exclusion. I'm really curious to see what you all are finding in your communities, because I think the United States is not a homogeneous place. There's different things that are happening in all different spaces and places right now. It looks like, and we're starting to see the bar graph populate here, looks like it's a really mixed picture right now. In some spaces, and I didn't ask you over what period of time, some of you might be responding over the last 10 years. inclusion is going up or inclusion is going down. Maybe some of you are responding, in the last 3 months, inclusion is going up or down. I didn't ask you a time frame. But collectively, your all perspectives are, we've got some increase in inclusion, we've got some decrease in inclusion. Some are staying about the same, and some we're not sure with. To me, inclusion is so incredibly critical. And at Northwest Harvest, we do something called an equity filter that we do on all of our key decisions. And it's essentially 4 things. It's essentially, if we do this or we institute X, Y, or Z, is there going to be a positive impact? The second is, did we meaningfully include the most important stakeholders in the decision? The third is, does it have the potential to do harm? And what are the unintended consequences of the decision or the practice or the behavior? And I think it's that second one that's so important is the engagement of stakeholders. The idea that we wouldn't make decisions that hadn't included the people who are most impacted by those decisions. And I suspect you all take that very seriously, and I think that's a really valuable, important thing that you're doing in the communities that you work in. We talk about race, equity, and inclusion being at the center of our strategies and the center of our culture. And so we, at Northwest Harvest, we built our strategies around race equity, both from distributing food resources today. We talk about food that's in demand. We talk about foods that are present on the tables of so many different cuisines and cultures in key moments. Let's make sure that there's food that's available for celebration and the staples that are available for everyday life. And that changes from culture to culture and community to community. I want to tell you about Charles, who was the very first shopper at the Soto Community Market. And if you could, in the 30% background picture, you can see stanchions. This is the Soto Community Market. It's our free grocery store in Seattle. And you can see stanchions, like airport-style stanchions. And on the very first day that Soto Community Market opened in June of 2018, we anticipated a large crowd. And so we put the stanchions out. And Charles was the very first person to arrive. Charles is going to be the first shopper because Charles got in line first. And Charles was watching me, scurry around and talk to media and, making sure everything looked beautiful and, staff huddle. And when he found a moment in my franticness that he could get my attention. And Charles, by the way, I'm terrible at judging ages. I think Charles was probably older than me. And Charles used a walker, one that had, has the wheels in the front and the grips in the back with the tennis balls. Charles said to me, "Your stanchions they're not wide enough. People are going to struggle getting their way through." And we had a conversation about this, and Charles and I, we walked through the entire Soto grocery store. He had arrived early enough. He and I both had some time to do this, and Charles helped me make sure there was enough space for people who needed a walker for mobility to get through the store. And we walked through the entire stanchions to make sure that it was spaced out wide enough. And I was so incredibly grateful for Charles. It was a teaching moment for him. He had a chance to help me realize we had missed the mark. And literally for every single open day since then, how many people did he make our market better for. And so to me, that's the value of inclusion. That's the value of recognizing that absolutely everyone that we come into contact with has an area of abundance that we can receive from. And so I have told, and Charles, if you watch this, thank you, because I have not seen you in years and years and years. Thank you for doing that for us. Thank you for making the Soto Community Market a more accessible place for people who walk with a walker. So I just really deeply believe in just this idea of inclusion and bringing people into decisions and learning from collective wisdom in the room and not judging who might be the people who can help us get better or help us learn the one thing that we didn't know we needed to learn, but that was the very most important thing for us to learn that day. Just curious for you, where do you see practices and systems or policies that are limiting or eroding inclusion these days? This is not a word. We're going to get a really rich set here. Federal government. I don't know if I can scroll down to see what's coming. Oh, I can't. Cool. Short timelines. ICE, dismantling of DEI. Complicated paperwork. ICE again. DSHS, attitudes and judgment. State departments, public life, HR, schools. And it's almost in all the areas we can think of that there's limits or erosions of inclusion. And this, to me, it just cripples our ability to get the strongest, most effective, most available solutions to people that we serve. You're still going, so I'm going to keep scrolling. Closed eyes versus open heart. Requiring English. Funding restraints, local government not understanding that state and federal funding isn't enough. Community education. Great, it's a fantastic list. White supremacy norms. Attack on gender affirming care. I mean, there's just so many areas in which, can I say it's almost become popular to inflict the politics of cruelty on certain populations? Is that being used as a strategy to gain votes or to signal affinity with certain groups and not with others? Systemic sowing of division, outright racism, the fear of the strength in minority communities. So many ways that you have identified practices, systems, and policies that limit or erode inclusion. Here's the question that I've been somewhat obsessed with over the past number of years. Because, and Mike already alluded to this, food banks often define their success by the amount of food, the number of pounds that they give away. And, I respect that. That's cool. I mean, food banks exist to provide free food for their communities. And so tracking the number of pounds, and especially if it's nutritious and it's in demand and it's highly valued, well, of course, that's a good metric to track. The part that makes me uncomfortable is if the only way to be successful is to give away more and more and more and more and more. Because that means you expect the demand for that food to be more and more and more and more and more. And I think it doesn't address the fact that there are systems that are failing all around us that require the food bank to be open, that require the more and more pounds to be available. So a couple of years ago, we started asking this question at Northwest Harvest amongst the team that I work with. What would it take, or what can be done to drive demand for food bank food down to zero? And again, I don't think this is a rhetorical question. I think this is doable. When we saw things like the CARES Act and the amount of more resources that went to SNAP benefits, what if we increased SNAP benefits 4x and we made more and more people eligible? We would see a rapid reduction in demand for food banks. What if we were to embrace universal basic income? You know, these are things that are maybe not popular enough to succeed right now, but it's not like it's unknowable. Do you know that in Belgium, the country of Belgium, they spend about 10% more of their GDP than the United States does on social programs? And their food insecurity rate is less than 1%. It's 0.9%. So hunger is not inevitable. Hunger is not, a function of the bell-shaped curve of the way resources are distributed, and it has to be something that we expect and accept. No, we could do things differently, and other people are doing things differently. Food banks don't exist all over the world. It's something that we've come to accept, and now I think there's big corporations and and government entities and food banks themselves that are working together to keep that system the same. Maybe we should be looking for the ways to dismantle that whole system, and asking ourselves, what are the better, more stable solutions in order to have a more equitable and more inclusive society in which there's less hunger. And so I would like us all to think about, what would it take to drive demand for food bank food down to zero? I think it's a powerful idea. What does success look like? When I worked for in an international organization, one of my really close friends, I lived in Bangkok, and one of my really close friends in Bangkok was Abdallah Himmadan, who is Sudanese. And Abdallah and I, we got to know each other. We had some pretty intense times working in different places. Some were highly security insecure, things like that. We had lots of time to talk. In Sudan, I learned from Abdallah that one of the worst insults that you could give someone else is to say they eat by themselves. From what I understood, I've never been to Sudan. What I understand from Abdallah is in Sudan, the value of ensuring that your neighbor next door and your neighbor across the community has enough to eat that you really just wouldn't even think about sitting down for your meal if you weren't sure that everyone in the community could eat. And to me, that just struck me as incredibly powerful. And that's what I want to see for Washington State. I want to see us tear up the current social contract that, we could be okay with having enough for ourselves, and if we can just distract ourselves enough to not think about folks next door or in the next community over, the next town over not having enough, we can eat well. What if here in Washington we embrace the wisdom of Sudan and we made sure, just person to person, neighbor to neighbor, community to community, that everyone has enough to eat? So there's a lot of different ways that we can achieve equitable access to nutritious food for everyone. I just don't think it can be done through, the food banking system. I think it has to be profound change in the way collected taxes are allocated, and in the ways that we live out our social contracts with each other, and in the ways that we at a federal level we spend the money. Me personally, I don't have any need to bomb Iran or threaten Iran. I'm a pretty big fan of Persian food. We could do math thanks to Persian culture. And what if we were able to use those resources that are set up to attack other places and to protect ourselves? When you're a bully on a global stage, you need to spend a lot of money protecting yourself. What if we just adopted a different stance, a more collaborative stance, a more relational stance that depended on interdependencies and more connection with each other rather than protecting ourselves from other people? Then we could have a lot more resources for things like food, for healthcare, for education. That's what I want to see in Washington State. I suspect that's what all of you are working towards each and every day. And I think that's the direction that we can head. When I was in, I think it was 2002 or 2003, I was in Johannesburg. I got the chance to meet Desmond Tutu. I mean, it was like the coolest moment of my life. It's like all of us think about those rock star moments where we rush the stage at I don't know, you fill in the blank, Tyler, the Creator concert, or whatever you're listening to, or we see a celebrity at a restaurant. I rushed the stage when it was Desmond Tutu, and it was pretty awesome. And one of my favorite quotes of his is, "If you're neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor." And I just think it's so important for us collectively, and maybe I just mean myself, to not be silent in these moments in which empathy has become like in the realm of one political party and not in the other, when the politics of cruelty seem to rule the day. These are the moments where oppression is real and palpable, where our neighbors who maybe aren't documented feel unsafe to leave the homes, or people who are giving care to others feel afraid to go about their daily lives. These are the moments, whether we're thinking about food insecurity or we're just thinking about relating to each other and being human being to human being. These are the moments in which we need to recognize that neutrality is not enough. We need to seize the moment, and we need to make as big a difference as we possibly can to create societies we want to be in so that communities function the way we want to see them. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. Now, I promised Nike I wouldn't go too long, but I think I talked too fast. But I think we have a little time for questions, or I don't know I'd love to hear your thoughts and perspectives on what you saw as the word clouds came. Anything you want me to clarify? I see a hand over here.
Who's got the microphone on his side?
Yeah, the question was, repeat the statistics about Belgium. So Belgium spends about 10% more of their GDP on social programs, and their food insecurity rate is about 0.9%. So, again, I think we're lulled into this false sense that things have to be this way. Oh, food insecurity is stubbornly stuck above 10%. No, that's an excuse not to make better solutions. And we've got ample evidence from other places that have figured out better than we have.
it was one of your comments, and it's a comment that I get in trouble for a lot of times in, you know, bragging about the numbers or the clients that we serve. It doesn't matter what we do, if it's food or if it's something else. But my dream is that one day the food banks would disappear. And I get in trouble for saying that sometimes because, you know, we're all about numbers.
Yeah.
But I wish, and my dream would be that the food banks would disappear totally.
Yeah, and that comes from, you know, Tri-County Parish, a beloved food pantry that really understands its community and provides amazing food to its community.
I'm curious if you could expand on the student exchange program you were talking about in Lima. What was the outcome, and did they continue it?
Good question. Okay, that was a number of years ago. I don't know if it's still continuing. It was probably 20 years ago. I hope it continued because the outcomes were really cool. I mean, it was really about building empathy between people groups, and you know, class is a really big deal in so much of the world, right? But that's true too in Peru. And from what I remember from the reports, is it built empathy and built friendships between student groups, and it was a project funded by, I can't remember who the funder, might have been USAID. It was continued for multiple years, and it really had a big value, and it was expanded in the area. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation, Thomas. This has been absolutely lovely. I'm really curious to the babies down the river analogy that we had spoken to earlier and everything else. In all of your experience, have you seen any instances where food bank-like organizations, the organizations that are pulling the babies out of the water, are also able to allocate resources to go upstream and do the systemic change? Like, how do we have that level of divide where we can both be accomplishing the change that we're looking for and also not allowing them to keep going downstream?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, it'd be interesting to talk to practitioners and not have me just answer the question. So I'll go first, but I hope a couple other people share their thoughts as well. Food bank practitioners are incredibly strong advocates because they bring both the everyday experience, and this is what I'm seeing and this is what I'm hearing, to legislators and help legislators see what could be more valuable and what's meaningful, and they help shape policy. So I would say many of the people, my colleagues that I work with, are thinking both upstream as well as doing the work right now. I think when it comes to resource allocation, that's the big challenge. It's like, for every next $100, do I buy more food because people are hungry, or do I invest in systems changing work? And I think that's where the big rub is. At Northwest Harvest, we have decided we're going to invest a higher percentage of what we're doing in systems changing work because we feel like it's a little bit, I won't do a long answer why, but food bank operators are better at securing food. They can do grocery rescue, so we don't need to do it. They can do backpack programs, so we don't need to do it. There's all sorts of things that we could do, but in some ways, we feel like we're competing with our peers. So we want to try to allocate more of our resources towards really changing the system and trying different types of things. But I think the challenge is, when you see need and need is high, it's really hard to allocate to addressing the systemic issues.
Hi, hola. I have some thoughts, and especially because, first of all, I am an immigrant. I am Mexican and Mesoamerican indigenous as well. So I can see the two stories here, from where I come from and where I am now, right? So first of all, when we are speaking about food insecurity, it comes to my mind food justice, right? Here in the US, I know for a fact the system is capitalism. Therefore, farming is a business, as well housing, as well healthcare. So where I come from, for sure, we don't have the good economy. We suffer the most, especially indigenous tribes. And I can see something here, affordability, because in Mexico at least, we used to say, we can eat beans and rice every day. But here is practically luxury to eat the way that I used to eat before, right? And so therefore, what I can see here is high cost practically in food production, because we are practically speaking about processing and distribution. It's not about the fact of having a lot of food banks, because we have. It's about those facts. Therefore, in my cases, why not then finding sustainable alternatives options, such as the indigenous rice that we have here in the US and here in Washington, that we can learn from them. So food supply, reducing costs, in my point of view, right? So why not then alternative proteins, for instance, like, for instance, insects. I know this is something that you were speaking about cultural approach regarding diets, but in most of the communities, for instance, when I'm a very curious person, I used to go to the Middle East market, an Asian market, and I can find similarities in our diet, a lot. And speaking about insects, sorry, but it's what it is. I used to eat insects. It's a lot of protein, by the way. So cactus, for instance, nopal, a lot of protein there. So it's just my thoughts, right? Alternatives, options. Therefore, when I'm speaking about self-sufficiency food, so then why not then speaking about the fact and community farm land trust nonprofits? Because something that I also observing, as a foreigner, is the lack of collaboration sometimes, And why not then creating practically like collective urban farming? Why not teaching our children in school, to farm your own food? Because in that way also we are creating inclusion, equity, but also respecting the Pachamama. We are not respecting the Pachamama, and farming is an issue. So therefore, for me, it would be wonderful having this impact, like you're saying, in a very meaningful way, starting with our youngest, right? So in Mexico, for instance, we need to have plants next to us. And here in our community, I bet 100% we don't have land, like you're saying, but we have an apartment and we have a window and we have cups and we have plastic bins, and there will be a lot of plants, right? So why not then using technology? In the US, we have a lot of technology, and we have also a lot of funds for technology. Therefore, why not home setup equipments? For example, hydroponics, and so on. Therefore, that will be a good advantage for creating food justice, where the community can say, okay, this is the food that I want to eat, and I'm going to protect. Therefore, I would say, why not? Thank you.
Thank you.
So something that I struggle with is I very much appreciate our funders. They enabled us to do a lot of things that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. But when we get client assist dollars, oftentimes it's restricted, where we cannot buy food. And given that food insecurity is a health disparity, I'm wondering if there could be some advocacy about making those client assist dollars be a little bit more flexible so that we can provide food gift cards, grocery gift cards, or what have you. So that's my question.
That seems wise. Yeah. I do think the challenge of restricted funding it limits what you do, and it's frankly, it's one of the reasons I chose to come to Northwest Harvest, because I had previously worked in an environment where 90% of our funds were restricted, and I wanted to. Northwest Harvest is almost entirely grassroots funded, so we can do the things that we dream of that are the most difference making. And so, I don't know, maybe there's a conversation you could have with your funders about, releasing some of the restrictions so that you can do the things that you think are most impactful.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for your presentation. I'm also from Tacoma, which is rich in areas of being food deserts. And the slow food movement is something that I've worked on in the last 15 years. And I'm wondering, speaking with my fellow communitarian who was speaking to diverse ways of accessing protein as taught by our community members. And when we identify food deserts in our communities and food-related diseases. I work for Center for Independence with this fine group of people with me here today. And we work with individuals with disabilities. So our crossover in the Venn diagram hits on all of those marks, from children to those ready to transition home. What can Northwest Harvest do? And you just mentioned 90% of your funding used to be restricted when you started. How much resources does Northwest Harvest have to help with us as bridge builders and connectors here in this room to help address and mitigate food deserts, increase the access to food, and support diverse ways of looking at our food systems and accessing nutritious, whole meals?
Mm-hmm. I don't think the model of Northwest Harvest is as a donor. So I think the question is, how can we use our resources to amplify the things that, those that we're in community with find as important? We're not going to be the bank that starts those things, but maybe we can identify, other funders that can be that support. We can do the advocacy work. We have a pretty good story writing team. I do think it's more of those types of things that we would do. We're not necessarily going to be the people that put the dollars in to do that work, but I agree with you that that's important, that's the important work that needs to be done.
I know that you talked about changing the way we tax is kind of the main way that we can hope to see change, and I know that we have the Washington State millionaires tax going to the House now. But so I was wondering, I know we just had a really big lobby day not that long ago, a week ago, but I was wondering if Northwest Harvest or maybe any other organizations here participate in lobbying at the state, and maybe how people here can get involved so that we can try to speak to our legislators in our districts about food policy and access and how important that is.
Sure, great question. And Northwest Harvest does that. I'm going to give you a Northwest Harvest resource, but then there's lots of other people who do it as well. But you can go to northwestharvest.org and go to our advocacy page, and you can do all sorts of things. Sign up for our alerts, get specific resources on how to talk to legislators about different types of topics. We are part of the Anti-Hunger and Nutrition Coalition. They also do a statewide policy agenda. One of the things that we think is important is a more progressive tax regime here in Washington State. But you can. Even people who are very, very busy, who don't have time to become a lobbying expert, or organizations that are relatively small, don't have time to hire someone to do that work, there are resources, and it's you could go and find a template and call someone or email someone and get your voice heard that way.
Hi, thank you for your presentation today. I work for the Foundation for Academic Endeavors, and we run educational justice programs in Skagit Valley. And one of our programs is a summer program where we rely on the federal summer feeding program for our students. And honestly, the quality and quantity of the food is really poor and inequitable. So I'm wondering if you know of any advocacy efforts to improve our federal feeding programs for students.
I know it's talked about. I'm just sort of reflecting on, I go and visit schools, and sometimes you look at the school meals and you think, there's so much more we could do here. Let's trade contact information afterwards, and I'll see if I can get you a better answer that you can take action with. I think that might be it. Thank you all so very much. And keep doing everything that you're doing, because I think you make a very big difference. Thank you.